Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're doing something a little different. We're putting on our forensic investigator hats to unpack the highly provocative, uncompromising platform known as Thoughtless Delineation, founded by Shane Bouel. Now, we are going to explore how his work completely challenges traditional narratives around the adoption industry, family separation, and institutional power. But I have to warn you, this isn't your standard look at child welfare. Instead, we'll be analyzing how these systems are framed through the rigorous lens of forensic auditing and existential sovereignty, according to his specific and frankly groundbreaking framework. To really understand this, we need to look at this striking visual metaphor that describes how Bouel actually moves through the adoption industry. He's equal parts philosopher, forensic investigator, and, well, social arsonist. Imagine that image for a second, a man carrying a lit match through a cathedral soaked in kerosene. In this text, the cathedral represents the deeply entrenched, almost sacred reverence society holds for the institution of adoption. But his work, it doesn't ask for permission to enter that space, and it definitely doesn't ask for permission to critique it. It indicts. It's aiming to expose what it describes as the hidden reality buried behind a benevolent facade.
You see, Shane Paul is basically what happens when institutional amnesia grows a nervous system and starts writing back. The text argues that for decades, there's been this massive, systemic forgetting, an erasing of the actual human cost of these social engineering programs. Thoughtless delineation frames itself as that nervous system finally waking up. The goal here is to provide a voice and a highly rigorous analytical framework to a reality that the author argues institutions have desperately tried to keep quiet.
Section 1. The Social Arsonist. Unearthing a Hidden Blueprint. So, who is the persona behind this digital stormfront? The text positions the author somewhere between James Baldwin with a massive data archive and a survivor dragging truth out of the ocean floor by bare hands. He treats language itself as contested territory. As the text states, every sentence is sharpened against propaganda, every metaphor is a crowbar. He uses this writing style to pry open the heavily guarded doors of institutional design. The essays ricochet between social critique, design theory, memory, and grief. It's written from the perspective of someone who survived the system, literally survived the spreadsheet, and decided the machine deserves no more polite euphemisms.
Section 2. The Architecture of Power, Deconstructing the Machine.
His essays read less like commentary and more like recovered evidence from a civilization trying desperately to hide what it normalized. The text draws a severe contrast between PR and hidden reality. On one side, you have the polite euphemisms institutions love to use: child welfare, compassion, benevolence. But on the other side, recovered evidence. The platform frames these systems purely in terms of market logic, arguing that beneath the compassion lies commodification, identity erasure, and family separation. The case is made that you absolutely cannot look at adoption or surrogacy without confronting this underlying architecture of power. And the engine driving all of this? According to this framework, the entire system functions through the manufacture of consent. What society likes to frame as charity is described here as a highly complex, legally enforced power structure. The text argues that it relies on emotional laundering to make the transactional nature of the industry palatable to the public. Essentially, it characterizes the system as a financialized institution that legally mandates the reassignment of a person's reality, all while demanding that the public view it as a pure act of rescue. Section 3. Pillars of the Blueprint. The Analytical Framework. Now, to break down something this massive, the platform relies on a systems theory grounded in 4 main pillars. First up is institutional power and forensic auditing, so treating these systems not as orphanages, but as financial architectures. Second is phenomenological reality, which centers the first-person lived truth of the survivor. Third is neuroethics and resonance, bringing in neuropsychosocial frameworks to really understand the biological impact. And finally, actionable transformation. These pillars are used to transform raw grief into a forensic audit. It demands we look at the structural, scientific reality of what the author argues was done to adoptees, rather than just focusing on individualized stories.
Which brings us to Section 4, the friction of identity, the molecular territory.
To explain this incredibly heavy, lived experience, the platform introduces the concept of adoption qualia. If you aren't familiar, qualia is a philosophy term referring to individual instances of subjective, conscious experience. In this context, the text argues that while the institution draws the map, the legal documents, the altered birth certificates, the territory is molecular. It's the lived existential reality of the adult survivor. The argument is pretty simple but profound. You can change a piece of paper, but you cannot legislate away a person's biological and historical reality without causing massive consequences. And that leads right into a key concept in the text, the Identity Stress Index, or ISI. By viewing this experience through his lens of neuroethics, the text attempts to completely redefine trauma. It frames it not as a personal weakness or a failure to attach or some inability to be grateful, right? But rather as structural friction. The platform defines this as the immense, grinding neurological stress caused by the gap between an enforced, assigned legal identity and a person's authentic, autonomous timeline.
Because of this intense friction, the author is fiercely allergic to any narrative that requires the vulnerable to disappear for society to feel morally comfortable. He terms this administrative disappearance. The platform describes this as an insidious process where institutions demand silence from the vulnerable in exchange for a sense of belonging. The text argues the underlying social contract of adoption often dictates that the adopted person must literally erase their own complex grief just so society and the adoptive family can stay comfortable. It frames this as a demand that the vulnerable disappear themselves just to uphold a myth.
Section 5. Demanding structural transformation, beyond the apology.
At the end of the day, Thoughtless Delineation frames itself as much more than just an archive of observation. It's an uncompromising demand for actionable transformation. The text insists that society must move way past mere apologies for past wrongs. Apologies don't dismantle the architecture, right? Instead, it demands absolute self-determination, specifically citing the enforcement of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 8. That's the article that protects a child's right to preserve their identity, including nationality, name, and family relations. The platform is actively fighting against what it calls the industrialization of human identity.
I think the ultimate purpose of this platform is perfectly captured in this one idea. Some people write to be understood. Shane writes so the lie can no longer survive contact with language. The essays are framed as forensic accounting. They're designed to ensure that the historical revisionism of these institutions just shatters upon contact with the truth. The core argument here is that once you see the systems through this specific framework, the benevolent lie is permanently broken. You just can't unsee it.
As we close out this explainer, we are left with some incredibly heavy questions. This text asks us to confront the architecture of power operating underneath us all. It forces us to look at concepts like emotional laundering and structural friction, and honestly ask ourselves, will society continue to demand that the vulnerable remain silent just to keep ourselves comfortable? Or, as this text challenges us to consider, is it time to let the old narratives burn? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the design,